right, hello once again. Jeff Scott talking HTML5 and CSS3 courtesy of Murox HTML5 and CSS3 third edition. I'm up to chapter 18 on how to design a website, so that's what I'm going to be going over right now. All right. So here's what we're looking at. We want to be able to design a website using guidelines, methods, and procedures that are shown in this chapter. Describe the notion of usability, which we did talk about at the beginning of the course, and explain how the current website conventions contribute to usability. Describe two basic approaches to use to design pages for responsive web design. You may remember we had a whole chapter earlier on responsive web design. Describe the primary principle for home page design if you're designing a small site for a relatively unknown company. Describe 3 ways to let users know where they are in a website. Describe the use of chunking. List 3 guidelines for typography on a web page. List 3 guidelines for web writing. Describe the life cycle of a website. Describe the most important principle for making a website easier to maintain. List the 4 steps in a general procedure for designing a website. Describe the use of a sitemap for designing a website. Describe the use of wireframes for designing web pages. Distinguish between a web designer and a graphics designer. Describe the concepts that top-down design and prototype are based upon. Now, let me just say that if your assignment, let's say at the beginning of the year, had been, I don't know, I've actually done this, and I don't know if I'm going to use this one or not, but let's say that what I had asked you to do was to make a website based on the life and times of Donald Trump. Okay, and I'm not a Trump guy, but I'm just saying, if I did that and I gave you very, very little in the way of direction, if I just gave you some general directions, and there were 24 of you in the class, I would hope that I'd get 24 very different websites. Now, of course, some of the content might be very similar. For example, some of you might talk about him wanting to put up a wall, disparaging things that he said about different people of different ethnicities, etc. But some of you might concentrate on what he did with the Miss America pageant before he got involved. Maybe some of the rest of you would concentrate on The Apprentice, etc. All right? So the idea is this stuff in here really and truly, it is web design. And the idea is when you do this, no two people are going to do it alike. And what's sad is sometimes you're going to be hired for a job and you're going to ask the person, okay, what do you want? And they will literally tell you they don't know. But what they want you to basically do is to create them something. And then they can start telling you what they don't want. And based on that, they're going to be telling you what they do want. So in this chapter, there's all sorts of guidelines and procedures for designing a website. All right? So, a website that's easy to use. You may or may not remember this, but way back in the beginning of the book, we defined usability as how easy it is to use a website. Usability is a critical requirement for an effective website. Remember, users want a website where they can find information quickly and they can get whatever it is they're looking for as quickly and easy as possible. Most users are in a hurry. They'll scan the web page to see what they're looking for, or some kind of a hyperlink or whatever that they're looking for. 3 guidelines for improving usability. Remember, that if you could imagine that you could fold this web page in half, as an example, and you'd fold it in half, all right, that you want critical information to be on the top half, or what they call above the fold, so the user doesn't have to scroll. They should be able to look at your web page and get what they want just taking a look at it. Second, you should group related items into separate components and limit the number of components on each page. Don't try to put too much on one page. Finally, adhere to the current conventions of website usability, which we're going to see in just a minute. So I went over all those already. All right. A web page that illustrates some of the current website conventions. It looks like this is a page, zappos.com, which I believe is a shoe place. All right. The header has a logo. It has a tagline in it. It has different utilities like a search feature, etc., and a navigation bar. The tagline tells you what's unique about the website, the fact, again, that it's Zappos. All right. The navigation bar provides links that let you go into different parts that are on the page. The utilities consist of links to useful but maybe not primary information down in here. All right. The search function is shown in a prominent place and it says search after it. Underlined text is a hyperlink. Images are clickable. Short text phrases in here, which are clickable. If you click on a cart symbol, you go to a shopping cart, as you can see up here. If you click on the logo, you always go back to the home page. So if the website you're working on implements these conventions, users will have a common look and feel. That's the idea. All right, it'll be much easier for them to get around. All right, some design guidelines. There's two basic ways that you can provide for mobile devices. Number one, and we talked about this a little bit back in Chapter 8, but you can use a responsive web design. In other words, you build really the way that you should be designing a website today is mobile first. Designed for the small screen, and it's much easier to scale up than it is to scale down. If you're not going to do that, what many places do is they build a separate website for mobile devices. For instance, I get the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel at jsonline.com. Okay? But when I go and look at it on my phone, it becomes m.jsonline.com because it's giving me the mobile version. So again, you can either design the mobile pages first and then expand for larger browsers, or you can design for the browsers first and make sure the designs work when the pages are worked on mobile devices. But the recommendation today is mobile first. Always be thinking responsive design. All right? I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but one thing that you might want to take a look at is you may want to eventually take a look at a package out there that's called Bootstrap. Okay? So here is your San Joaquin Valley Town Hall on a laptop or desktop, and there it is on a mobile device. All right, other things that you should do. The home page should sell the site. Remember, there are probably going to be a fairly high number of visitors to the site that may go nowhere else other than the home page. Now that said, when you say that the home page should sell the site, ideally what the home page is going to do is it's going to make you want to look at the other pages that are on the site. But if your home page stinks, people might never give the rest of the site a chance. So they give you some guidelines on page 609, and again, most of the stuff that's in here is self-explanatory. Emphasize what the site offers that's valuable, how it differs from the competition. All right? Emphasize high priority tasks so users, make it easy for them to iterate their way around the site. Don't worry about welcoming users. They're already there. Group items so that similar items are next to each other. Only use icons for navigations if the users will readily recognize them. In other words, don't come up with your own images, etc., to use that are different than most other people's. You might think it's cool, other people might find it very confusing. Design the home page so that it's different. It sparkles, it bangs, it pops, as opposed to other pages on the site. Don't include a link to the home page on the home page. And to be honest with you, that's one that most people violate. Code the title for the home page as the organization name followed by a short description. Limit it to the title to 8 or fewer words and 64 or fewer characters. This is where you have to be able to start coming in here and put on a lot of different hats. You have to be able to learn to write and write compactly. If the site provides shopping, include a link to the shopping cart on the home page. Again, let users know where they are. Okay, here's a product page and it's got some of the active links are highlighted. The heading for the page should be the same link that led them to the page. Provide breadcrumbs. All right, and where's the breadcrumb on here? Not sure if they even have one, but if you've never seen a breadcrumb, basically what it shows you is a list of how you got to where you are, for lack of better words. As the site gets more complex, the user is more likely to lose track of where they are. So there's a breadcrumb. You went from the home page to men's to shoes and sneakers or sandals. Now, with some packages, they allow you the opportunity to put your breadcrumb in reverse order. So instead of going from the start to the end, you go from the end to the start. I'd recommend not using that. Make the best use of page space. All right? So keep your headers small. Again, you want to bring the user into the page, but look at the difference between using a picture like this and using a picture like this. All right? The most valuable space on each web page is the stuff nearest the top. To get the most from it, prioritize what you're putting on the page. Now you might remember earlier I mentioned chunking, C-H-U-N-K-I-N-G. And on page 615, they define chunking as the division of content into smaller chunks that can be presented on separate pages or separate components on a page. This lets the user select the chunks of information they're interested in. Now you could make a case here and say that you really probably could have, what they've done here for their best sellers is they've got 3 books. All right? And they've got all this information in different sections, the way that it's laid out. You may or may not like it, but again, the idea is the information is more accessible to the user. You don't need to scroll. You're keeping that information above the fold. Know the principles of graphic design. All right? Here's a page that doesn't adhere to those. So let's take a look at some of these. Alignment means that related items on a page should line up with one another. Well, they don't exactly. All right. Proximity. Related items should be close to one another. Repetition. Repeat some elements on a page to give the page continuity. Contrast. If everything is the same, if it's all kind of blah, it all runs into each other and it's harder to use. Some of the guidelines that are shown on page 617 and on the slide right here. Limit the line length of paragraphs to 65 characters. I mean, that's not a hard and fast rule, but it's pretty much a generalization. Use a sans serif font in a size that's large enough for easy reading. Show the relationship between the heading and the text that follows it by keeping them close. Use dark text on a light background. Don't use an image for your background. That can really, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of wash out what you're trying to do. Show the relationship between the heading and the text that follows. Again, I think I said that by keeping them close. Don't center text. Now it says in here, don't justify text. I don't always agree with that. I think it depends on the site. If you indent the first lines of the paragraph, you don't need space between paragraphs. Don't use reverse type. In other words, don't put white type on a colored background. If you aren't a graphics designer, you can at least use these principles to get a start. All right, again, they're on 617. Writing that isn't for the web. This is too big of a paragraph. Remember that people that come into a website, by and large, they want to skim what they're looking at and scan what they're looking at. They don't want the information to be voluminous. In other words, they want to get to the information they're looking for as fast as possible, get in, get out. So writing for a website is different from writing for a printed page. You use fewer words. So notice the difference between this and this. Again, use fewer words. Write in inverted pyramid style. In other words, go from most important to least important. Use headings and subheadings to define where you are. Use bulleted lists to make information more accessible. Use tables, but only use tables for tabular information. Don't use tables to center things or whatever, because that's just dumb. Don't use all caps for headings. Make the text for all links as explicit as possible. Don't have click here links. Explain why you want them to click there. We already mentioned to keep the line length to 65 characters or fewer. All right. So here's the life cycle of a website. You design, you implement, and you maintain. Notice it goes back again then to design. So when you're maintaining, you're always, a website is really never complete. All right? You're always tweaking it. So they give you some guidelines here. Use HTML for the content and CSS for the page layout and formatting, and make sure you've got that separation of concerns that we've talked about earlier. Again, use tables only for tabular information, not for page layout. Don't use frames. They're not even talked about in this book. They're old school. Get the design right before you implement it. If you're creating a website for someone, make sure you talk to that someone and get their agreement. Don't do a lot of work just to find out that you did a lot of work that no one wants. A general procedure for developing the site: define your audience, set your goals, develop a site map. Do this before you start doing anything else. Sketch, maybe even on a piece of paper. The old saying was on a napkin. All right, the critical pages, and just write them down. Don't be afraid to use full color for critical pages. As far as implementing the website, so we looked at design, and as far as implementing it, again, develop the HTML and CSS, develop the web pages, deploy it to a server, which is the next chapter, and test and launch, which is also on the next chapter. And then as far as maintenance, Plan for changes. Over time, people are going to want to make changes. I will give you an example. A few years ago, I guess it was several years ago now, I had a student, Trevor, that was doing a site for the Janesville Senior Center. And it appeared, we went in and met with them several times. And one time when we went in there, somebody had seen a site that they liked, and it was this very different color green. And it had a very different font, but they really liked the way that it looked. So Trevor had been working on their site, which they originally wanted to be more of a tan background, with black writing. So he made all the changes that they wanted. We came in about a week later and met with them, and they looked at us like we were crazy, and they said, "Why did you use this green background, etc.?" And it was everything they asked us to do. They asked us why we did it. Well, it got to the point where this happened a couple times, and Trevor eventually said, I understand that a site is never finished, etc., but I'm finished. I'm going to give them one more iteration. And that's sometimes, if you don't plan for change in the right way, that's what's going to happen. So plan for change, design for change, implement your change, test and launch them. So again, this life cycle includes design, implementation, and maintenance. Sometimes you spend more time, and a lot of times, maintaining than you do developing it. As you're designing the website, you get user feedback at each step. The more feedback you get, the better off you're going to be. So they've given an example website in here, starting on page 622. This is going to be a website about Town Hall. I don't want to read this to you because you can see it. Here's our target audience. They're all people who directly or indirectly have some kind of a relationship with Town Hall. So we define what we're doing, we define our audience, we define our goals. This is a living document too. There might be, as you get into it, you might find that something is in there that you don't need, or you're missing something that you do need. But you have to watch out for what's referred to as analysis paralysis, where you just keep adding information. Somebody comes up to, oh yeah, I want this. Oh yeah, and I want this. Oh yeah, and I want this. That's what Trevor went through with a site that I mentioned before. Then you create a sitemap. Did I skip one here? No. All right. And again, it's important that when you're doing this and you create this sitemap, you bring the user in. They may be a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Intimidated by this and say, well, I don't really understand that. And you can come back and say, you know what? Not to be mean or sarcastic, you don't have to. But what we're showing is we're going to have a home page. And based off that home page, we're going to have a speakers page. And based off of there, we're going to have a page for each speaker. Based off the home page, there will be a get tickets page. Based off the home page, there will be a become a member page. And based off of that home page, there will be an about us page. And under the about us, there'll be a bunch of pages. All right? So you're developing that sitemap that shows all of the pages, or typically, at least most. There might be some pages that are personal or otherwise that you don't want to show on a sitemap. So the first level, all right, is usually your home page. The second level represents the links in the navigation bar, and everything below that is what you can access from those links. You can use a simple drawing program like Visio, or you can use a software product that exists for drawing sitemaps. We talked a little bit before about, and there's the sitemap for Murock's site. All right. Here is a wireframe. Again, wireframes can be done using software, or they can just, at first, many times you do it like this. You sketch it out, then you put it into software. All right. And it's not going to look exactly like this, but it's going to look pretty much like it. So what the wireframe is then, is it's a sketch or a drawing in black and white You want the focus to be on the web page components, not how they look. The wireframe can be drawn by hand or again using a product. After the sitemap has been approved, you wireframe the home page and at least one of the content pages. And you run it by your end user to say, this is what we're going with, unless you've got changes. In general, you don't need to wireframe every page on the site. Here's a Photoshop illustration, so you can use really good software products for that. Again, we're illustrating here the critical pages, because after the wireframes have been approved, you want to illustrate these critical pages, and typically in full color, as we're shown here. All right, there and back one. All right, so most graphic designers use something like Photoshop in order to do that. Another alternative is to physically develop the pages using something like Dreamweaver. That way, if people like it, well, you got to look at it that, well, look, we've already got a bunch of the work done. All right. There are other design considerations. Typically, you've got a lot of people who work on a website. You've got designers. The designers are typically, they know something about HTML, but they're probably CSS experts. You've got writers. All right? And these writers are the people who have to make your text pop. You've got marketing specialists who might understand color and the like. You've got graphics designers who do the same kind of things. All right? So web designers will participate in all phases of the web design. Graphic designers are going to focus on web pages, that look better, more inviting, whatever you want to say. Now, in a large company, the website might be designed and implemented by a team. In a small company, you might have a single person doing everything. Unless you're designing your own website, you'll probably be working with others. And you'll have other people that you have to answer to and other people that you have to work with. All right? Web designer and graphic designer are typically not the same thing. Typically, graphics design is just a part of web design. All right? So here's your typical members, as I mentioned. There you go. The last thing that's discussed in here is a little bit about top-down design and prototyping. Top-down design means you start with a specific and you go to the general. So you start with the most difficult aspects of the website and you proceed your way downwards toward the less critical aspects. A prototype is a limited working model of a website. Typically with a prototype, all right, you don't have all the bells and whistles. So you might have a prototype like this, and if you look on the screen right here, the buttons for like add to cart, etc., might not even work. It's a prototype. It's a limited working model, and that's all it's designed to be. So if you apply what you learned in this chapter, you should be able to start designing websites. You should be able to start designing websites on your own. Okay? It's challenging. It's also unbelievably rewarding. All right, that's it for Chapter 18. I'll be back with Chapter 19, how to deploy a website on a server. And it won't be probably a very long chapter because I'm going to put most of that off and put most of that on to John, who's the lab assistant. Okay, and I'll explain why when we get to that lecture in just a couple minutes.